Good evening. Welcome to Grand Blanc Township Board of Trustees meeting for Tuesday, August 25th. And let's rise for the pledge, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll call the meeting to order, and I'd want to mention that with regard to the agenda, I did receive a couple of emails. I was out on Friday, but I did receive email on late Thursday night and another one on Friday night. Mr. Mansour asked that we add two topics. Received his request on Thursday evening, and was a review of water ordinance relative to use of well water for irrigation, which I think, if you're okay, Mr. Mansour, we can slide that in under item C, or I'm sorry, item B, where the board's going to discuss water rate study, and we can include it there. And the other item topic that Mr. Mansour asked is a review of enablers to allow HOAs, including those involving private roads, to establish special assessment districts. And we have a topic on here to discuss an update on special assessment districts, so if you don't mind, we'll include that topic under that agenda item.
Okay.
All right. Mr. Mansour, I'm sorry, Mr. Guzak had emailed me on Friday night. And typically we did have the agenda out on Thursday. Typically we'd send it out on Friday at noon, but I wasn't around on Friday. But if the board would like, we can add, he would like a discussion of two items. One, the board to discuss our labor attorney and review the services we paid in 2019 and 2020. There was support for that from a number of board members, and I would say let's put that under C, between C and D. The other item was, the second item was the board will discuss the hiring of a new township superintendent, and let's put that following the discussion with regard to the labor attorney. So between C and D, we'll have C1 and C2. So unless there's any other changes, like I said, if we can make sure that the agenda items are to us by Thursday, we'd like to have them Thursday afternoon at the latest, because like I said, we try to get the agenda out Friday around noon. Unless it's an emergency, we can add it last minute. Ms. Lane?
May I verify with you, Mr. Supervisor? I don't see Trustee Atkins or Trustee Thomas. Is that my error, or are they not there?
We do not see them in attendance, no.
Thank you.
All right.
Is there a motion to accept the agenda? I'm
wait
sorry.
a second.
Go ahead, Mr. Mansour.
Just quickly, sorry. I have a quick note from Trustee Thomas that he's having difficulty calling in. So is Robbie or something there?
Are you? Your line is muted.
Yep.
Okay, your sound went out for a minute.
Yep. So just a quick, I don't know if Robbie's there, but apparently Trustee Thomas is having a difficult time getting in. So I have a telephone number. If you can give him a quick call and maybe try to hook him in.
Do you have his number, Robbie?
Is Robbie around?
Yeah. Do you have his number? I've got it here. Looks like you tried calling me. Okay. Mr. Beller will give him a call. Okay. So is there a motion to accept the agenda as we amended it? Ms. Lane, you need to unmute yourself.
Mr. Chair, I would move that we adopt the agenda as amended.
Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Lane.
Okay. Mr. Guzak?
Yes.
Myself? Yes. Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Mr. Mansour? Mr. Mansour?
Yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Just a second here. Before we go to citizen comment, I'd just like to say that for those of you who follow the Grand Blanc Township Board meetings, you noticed their last meeting on August 13th. I think we reached another all-time low. And after the events of the past months, I didn't think that was possible, but it was. The personal attacks and some against me by one board member in particular have reached a new level. And behind the so-called safety of the executive sessions, several other board members joined in. And I invite them to make those comments or condemnations during an open meeting as well in front of the public. But also at that meeting, which we'll discuss a little bit later, the board almost succeeded in firing our labor attorney firm. Were it not for a last-minute hesitation by Clerk Kathy Lane, that coup would have been successful. With that, I'll open it up to public comment. And unfortunately, Mr. Beller, we're going to have to go to public comment. If he can't get on the line, then we're going to have to figure something else out. But so I would ask anybody that has public comment to raise their hand. Okay. Ms. Hobson, go ahead. Ms. Hobson?
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Supervisor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Maria Hobson. My address is 8389 Parkside Drive. And as I've said before, I've been in this community my entire life, pretty much. And I have to agree with you about the all-time low. Not only was I surprised when at the end of the meeting that another impromptu motion was, brought up and to fire the labor attorney. Now, I can tell you, I don't know anything about this labor attorney. All I can say is that to do it honestly is the way that Mr. Guzak is doing today. He's opening it up for discussion as to what services and what we paid and things like that. So Mr. Guzak is absolutely correct in what he does, and he's always been very professional. It's just his trustees that feel like they invented Grand Blanc Township and that they're the only ones that can make a motion, and they're the only ones that their vote is important. Although they got the lowest amount of votes of anybody, and they keep wanting to sabotage Grand Blanc Township. This is a great community, and I just really hope they put their personal agendas aside and stop doing this. You will not be back in November, so there's no reason for you to continue on with this. You're not going to shape this community any longer. You're out, so you have to stop doing this. And one last thing, as I said before, I've been personally attacked at several of these meetings as well. And the last meeting, it was stated that because Trustee Massey did not know what I was talking about, instead of him saying that he did not know what I was talking about, he said that I was making things up. Well, I can tell you, I don't make things up. But at least that was a lot more polite than the way he normally speaks to yourself and the way he used to speak to Mr. Limita. So that's about all I have to say. I just really wish you guys would understand your place. The people have spoken, and if you want to run again in 4 years, feel free. But for now, you're not coming back. So please take that into consideration. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Hobson. We have Mike Yancho, Senior. Mr. Yancho, you need to unmute your line. Okay, you're unmuted.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Yancho.
Thank you to the board and our supervisor. My name is Mike Yancho, Senior, 10640 Halsey Road. I moved into this township in 1963. I've been here a long time. I take great pride in our community. I graduated from Grand Blanc schools My children graduated from Grand Blanc schools, and my grandchildren are graduating from Grand Blanc schools. But I only have a couple of things to say. One only has to look at the results of the recent primary election to see that it is apparent that the citizens of this township do not approve of the actions of many of those who now sit on this township board. But a person could also look at social media to see how people feel and react when talking about the actions of this board. I'm also extremely disappointed in our trustees, many of whom I voted for just 4 years ago. It's about basic transparency and character. Residents know that. You might think that they are not paying attention, but they are. Especially when things start to smell. I won't attempt to speak for them, so I will share with you some of the quotes from social media that our residents have posted. Quote, "There has to be something we can do about this. It seems like the people who are being voted out are trying to create as much damage as possible on their way out the door." End quote. New quote, "This is completely and utterly unacceptable. What the hell is going on? Seriously?" Quote. New quote, "Bottom line, our tax dollars will end up paying for these mistakes. Blanc Township residents cannot afford to pay for these lawsuits. Our MTA liability and pool insurance is going to go through the roof." End quote. New quote, "At the rate they're going, there isn't going to be much for a new board. Will exit or be gone or all screwed up. I can't believe it has come to this with these people." End quote. New quote, So disappointed in a township that I have lived my whole life and bragged about. I'm sorry to say that I am embarrassed." End quote. New quote, "Unreal. Extremely disappointed is an understatement. All I can say is that I am grateful for our residents and their support and turnout at the polls on August 4th. We need and deserve a new trustee board who will act in our best interests and move the township forward, not the personal agenda and tear it apart." End quote. New quote, "They're going to try and make many changes before they leave office. This should be against the law. And there should be an oversight committee put in place during the changeovers so these sorts of things can't happen." End quote. Talking. Some of these comments and the federal results of the primary election, but mostly on my own position, I do not feel that this lame duck board should take any actions that are outside of ordinary course of current business. The only actions they should take up are paying the bills, approving the requests from the various departments, and other such ordinary matters. The current board in the last 3 months of their terms of office does not make any decisions that will determine the direction of this community in the long term. Items of long-term effect can mostly be postponed until after the new team takes office. Therefore, I ask you not to hire, fire, or replace any consultants or contractors for the township. I have also heard that there are those who might try to seek retribution against any township employees or others that have been outspoken about the shenanigans going on in this township. Any action taken against these employees would probably result in more lawsuits and charges against the township. We've already, due to the inappropriate actions of this board, are looking at a possible $750,000 payout for a pending lawsuit. Please keep your hands in your pockets and do not take any more actions such as this. Lastly, I should also point out that this community will not soon forget the activities and transgressions of this board. Residents will remember of this board who have failed to heed the response and reaction of your constituents will tarnish your reputations forever. I would recommend that you back off on taking any action on any issue as long-term consequences. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yancho. We have an individual with their hand up, Kylie. Mr. Beller, go ahead and unmute.
Mr. Bennett, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. We have Kylie that has her hand up, so we would like to ask her to unmute her line. Go ahead, Miss Kylie.
This is Kylie McCready of 2300 Russell Street, and I just have one question. I would like to know if there has been a grievance filed against any of the board of the labor unions because of the actions that were taken by individual trustees or other board members over the past 2 weeks. That's all I would like to know, and hopefully I'll get an honest answer. Thank you.
I'll address that at the end of the meeting, but we have received one, a couple of them. Okay. Dave Robertson. Need to unmute your line, Mr. Robertson. Mr. Robertson?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. David Robertson, 5511 Wakefield Road, Grand Blanc, Michigan. I wanted to speak.
The board is getting wrecked, right?
Somebody
Excuse me? I'm sorry.
Somebody had their line unmuted accidentally, I believe.
Okay. Very good. I wanted to say a few words on public comment, that I concur in the sentiments of the current folks that have spoken before me this evening. I'm very concerned about the future actions that I know there's being considered or being advanced by some members. Let me just, and I want to be respectful in the way that I say this, because having 20 years of service in elective office, I know that that a person's term ends when it ends. The job of the trustees and the other officers of this board are yours right up until the moment that they're not. But I would hope that those on the board who will not be on the board after November would use this time, and I would think they would be an appropriate time for some circumspection, some introspection with regard to what happened on August 4th. It is a very rare thing when a community speaks as forcefully as this community did on August 4th in making the changes that it did. Clearly, it can be, I think, correctly argued that in significant measure, not entirely, but in significant measure, the outcome of the August 4th election was a referendum on this board's decision to fire Dennis Nemeda and take other actions. So there's no question that the people have in fact spoken on that subject, and I would hope and ask that the board members who are completing their tenure be introspective, be circumspect with regard to taking further actions that could compound or exacerbate or create greater liability for the township that their previous actions have already created. You could compound the situation and make it worse. I disagree with the argument of making a decision with regard to the labor attorney at this particular time. I think that should be left to the new board. And I would hope that also those that might be affected or be by any decisions that would be made between now and November 3rd would take note of the fact that any major decision that is made between now and November 3rd will not last very long. It will not last beyond November 3rd. I can assure you of that as a member of the board who, as a result of the outcome of the election, will be joining the board after the November election. I can make that promise to you as one member, and I hope that you would take that into consideration and be introspective with regard to your decisions going forward. Again, I want to be respectful in the fact that this is your position and it's your role in your term of office right up until that term expires. But I would hope that you would, the events of the past month would bring about some circumspection, some introspection with regard to whether or not you should take further actions between now and November. I'm thankful to the board for the opportunity to speak this evening, and those are my comments. Thank you, Mr. Supervisor.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson, and congratulations on your election. We also have, with their hand up, Ms. Sarah Hugo. Mr. Beller? Go ahead and, okay, you're unmuted, Ms. Hugo.
Thank you, Supervisor Bennett. My name is Sarah Hugo. My address is 5545 Rush Drive. I would like to remind the current board that the actions that took place at the last scheduled board meeting after executive session have not gone unnoticed. That was the exact way the superintendent was dismissed, without discussion. These actions need to stop. This board does not need to make long-term hiring and firing decisions, period. For a trustee to make a motion to dismiss our labor attorney without having it on the agenda as a discussion item, bringing it up after 10 p.m. when no one is watching, and recommending hiring a replacement law firm right on the spot is politically immoral. A few board members have continued to make a motion to add items to the agenda. They continue to move in the direction of making long-lasting decisions. As a potential incoming trustee and a concerned resident, I do not feel it's appropriate for the current board to be making these kind of decisions. Disrespect towards the supervisor, the residents, and even towards each other must stop. There have been so many highly unethical actions by these trustees, and they need to stop immediately before the township gets sued again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Hugo. Mr. Beller, Larry Anderson is trying to raise his hand. Mr. Anderson, I think you're on
There
mute.
you go, Mayan.
Yes.
Hear me? Okay. I would also like to address, I'm sorry, Larry Anderson, 6524 Kings Point Road, Grand Blanc. I too would like to address this board on the decision to A, try to rush the hiring process for a new superintendent, and B, the process to terminate the labor attorney or possibly seek a new firm. To refresh my memory, I watched the board meeting again from 6/23, where the township superintendent was dismissed. These board members spent more time discussing the mileage on police vehicles than they spent discussing terminating the supervisor. They wanted reports from the DPW director. They wanted to talk to the mechanic. You guys wanted all kinds of information and were concerned about the safety of a vehicle on the road that has 150,000 miles on it and wanted to review that report for the next meeting. And then you turn around and fire the superintendent with 9 minutes of discussion. I also find it interesting that you wanted to terminate the labor attorney, and you did that in a knee-jerk reaction at the last minute. Casting a big net is what's going to get you a good, qualified superintendent. It's not somebody that you're going to put out a notice for and have it hired in 2 weeks. This is a long process. It's going to be statewide, possibly nationwide, to find the right candidate. I was on the board that hired the superintendent. I know how long it takes, and I don't think a group of lame duck trustees who have nothing to lose and will be out in November need to rush this process. The next board's going to have to live with this decision, and I don't think it's right to rush it and try to get something done quickly. I find a lot of the campaign literatures from some of you guys that you sent out prior to the August primary, where you list on your flyers all the great accomplishments the board has succeeded, listing your name, such as the DDA and the Technology Village that you brought up. Well, guess what? Those aren't on your election cards. Those are on the former superintendent's plate. He was the one who brought those to the board. He was the one who brought all that stuff up, not you trustees. So to say that you don't need him or you're not happy with the leadership of him, possibly our labor attorney and so forth, I think you need to take a second look. I think you need to discuss that at least as long as you discuss how much mileage we should allow on a police cruiser. That's all I have to say. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Anybody else have public comment? I've gotten a message that some are finding difficulty with trying to raise their hand. I would ask you if you're unable to raise your hand, if you want to unmute your line and tell us your name and address. Okay. If you go on your screen, and there should be a participant tab at the bottom of the screen. It has shows a couple of people, I don't know, caricatures of 2 individuals. If you click on it, bring up a list, and then down at the bottom of that list there is a icon on the bottom right, Mr. Beller? Yes, bottom right. If you click on that icon in the bottom right of the list of the attendees, that will actually show the hand raise. We'll give you a minute. I've got a letter that I received that individual wanted me to read, and if anybody wants to raise their hand during that time, go ahead, but then we'll move on. Dear Supervisor Bennett, I am unable to attend tonight's meeting. However, I would like my comments read into the minutes. The primary election was a referendum on this current board's decision to fire Dennis Limata. As we know, 4 of the 5 people who voted to terminate Mr. Limata were voted out of office. I strongly encourage this board to allow Supervisor Bennett to run the day-to-day operation of the township until the incoming board has the opportunity to pick the next superintendent. I will move to reverse any and all destructive actions this board takes to set policy or make long-term changes of hiring decisions if I am elected. In fact, I will be an advocate for hiring Dennis Limata back as superintendent. Secondly, if this board was serious about reducing attorney fees, then the 5 who voted to fire Mr. Limata would not have done so. As a result of this poorly thought out, spiteful action, our insurance premiums are likely to increase. Lastly, the 5 trustees who voted to terminate Mr. Limata have proven to be an embarrassment to the residents of our community, its employees, and retirees. Thank you, Jude Raridan, 5376 Old Shawboro Road, Grand Blanc. Do we have any others? Put your hands up. Okay, I see Ed with his hand up if you want to unmute yourself.
How's that? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I'd just like to make a couple of comments. I heard some talk about getting their facts and information from social media.
Yeah, please give us your name and address. I believe it's Mr.
Ed, 7212 Porter Road.
Thank you.
In regards to social media, I don't think that's a good source to get your facts. I think attending these township board meetings and speaking at them, getting involved, is the only source for facts. Social media can be distorted. So that's my comment on that. And when we just, someone commented about rushing to hire a new superintendent. I don't think this board is rushing on hiring a superintendent. They've had no discussion on it for 2 months. No action has been taken. So it hasn't been worked on. It hasn't been rushed. I think the wheels need to get turning on it, though, and I spoke of that at our last meeting, that we should get the wheels turning, regardless of whom makes the decision, which board. So I think you need to get the wheels rolling, okay? The other thing is, and this is a tough one for me to talk about, I heard some discussion about some things that happened behind closed doors in an executive session. I think those comments are... There's not supposed to be comments on what happens behind closed doors in executive session. That is private and stays back there. So that's my comment at that, and thank you for listening to me.
Okay, thank you. I don't see anybody else with their hand up, so unless, do you see anybody? You can try and unmute yourself if you did have a comment. Okay, seeing no further hands raised, we're going to move on to our agenda. So first item on the agenda is we've already approved the consent agenda of paying the bills and operational issues. The board will discuss the deputy supervisor role and compensation. Mr. Laddie sent out a version of the agreement that basically would outlines the responsibilities for the deputy supervisor, which evidently the MTA recommends. And as we stated before in prior meetings, the deputy supervisor would be able to step in my absence to conduct several items of business that might be necessary in my absence. Any discussion, Ms. Lane?
First of all, I checked the calendar, and the first meeting of the new board would be November the 24th. So where Attorney Laddie put in until November 21st, if that was agreeable, knowing that that is a scheduled meeting for the new board, I would make that suggestion, that it be changed to the 24th. And the other one is, I'm not comfortable with him acting as a personnel director. This is an interim type of thing, and so that is highlighted in yellow, and so I would delete that statement as well, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Well, I ask that we keep it in because if I am in my absence, we have a personnel issue, I would like the chief to be able to sit in on that. We had a situation, as I mentioned, a couple of meetings now, where we needed some additional staff up front. He could have coordinated that meeting in my absence. Instead, I had him there with that meeting, in that meeting. But I don't see him making long-term decisions for personnel, but I do see it important to have somebody here that can help moderate a meeting, maybe between department heads or maybe between a couple of employees. So I feel it's important to leave that in. I'm not sure why it's highlighted. I don't know, David, was there, Mr. Laddie, was there some change with that?
No, we again, without getting into anything we talked about in a closed session, that was my impression of the result of previous discussions that we had. And I think, I mean, we identified the superintendent as the personnel director, and again, the duties that are not going to be exercised by a superintendent in the absence of one would fall to the supervisor. And so my impression was that when we talked about the fact that the deputy would serve in the absence of or when the supervisor wasn't present, that seemed to be, and that's a term that we discussed quite a lot in the last 6 months or so. And so my impression was that it's probably best to leave in.
Any other discussion on any other items? The area of compensation was left blank. The board did not agree on any sort of compensation for the deputy supervisor. I think it deserves some type of compensation. Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Going back to HR.
Yes.
My understanding, we already have 2 people in HR. Mm-hmm. So why would we need a third person on the meeting in HR? Mm-hmm. Are you saying the people that we currently have in HR is inept? That's what it implies. You already got 2 people acting as one is permanent and one of them is acting, helping the other one out. So now you bring in a third, whatever personnel person. So that tells me, how many people do you need?
I only know of 1 person in HR. I don't know of 2 people in HR, but in her absence, and there's things that the supervisor would do that the HR person doesn't. I mean, the HR person doesn't moderate meetings between department heads or what have you. So no, it doesn't infer that anybody's inept. The other thing is that the HR people are not management. The deputy supervisor would be. So, anybody have any other comments on this? Ms. Lane?
Rather than making, and I would leave this up to Mr. Laddie as having possible better language maybe, But rather than acting as personnel director in your absence, would there be something like to work, to interact between department heads?
Well, tell me this, Ms. Lane.
Necessary?
Yeah. Tell me this, what is your fear with having personnel director in there?
I just think, again, that's something that the supervisor should handle, or the board should handle.
Well, it is the supervisor.
But
In my absence, he's acting as deputy supervisor, just like your clerk signs documents in your absence. The deputy clerk signs documents in your absence.
I guess I haven't heard of any. There's an inference that I've heard that I know nothing about as far as something going on behind the scenes. As I said.
Well, you know what? I'm in favor of not even having an agreement, and I'll just have them do what I see fit.
I don't think that's quite appropriate, though. I think that the Michigan Townships Association says there should be an agreement.
Well, if we're going to fly spec this thing meeting after meeting, and we're going to argue over whether it says personnel director or whether it says we'll work with department heads, then I say we just skip it, and I'll assign them duties as needed. Mr. Thomas? You need to unmute your line, Mr. Thomas.
Unmuted.
Comment, and I did have citizen comment, and so did Mr. Mankey, and his hand was up also.
Okay.
So I understand that we just pick and choose.
No, I didn't.
Some of the comments
I did not see anybody's hand up.
some of the comments were really uncalled for.
Well, let's.
And as the supervisor, please don't interrupt me. I have the floor. You should agree with that. Now, about this compensation, I do not think it's fair for Scott or Chief Wiles to do this for free. That's just not fair. The trustees of the board took a $4,000 bonus because of the extra work that we thought that we deserved for the long hours that we put in for and the continuing hours. So I don't think it's fair that Scott and Ron don't get the same type of respect in issues. But Scott, what are you suggesting for Supervisor Bennett? What are you suggesting for a good compensation?
Well, the compensation, I don't believe you were at the meeting, Mr. Thomas, but the board did ask to compensate me $1,000 a month for the extra duties. There was no compensation.
Okay.
So that's what.
What did you say about Ron? What did you say about the chief? There was no compensation for him?
That's correct, at least not at this time. We went into executive session, discuss it, but I mean.
I'd like to make the motion. Okay, so big disagreement right now is about the way that power falls down, that the Chief Wiles would be able to make decisions basically over directors, right?
I didn't understand you. I didn't understand that you were cutting in and out, Mr. Thomas.
Yeah, someone keeps on calling me. Give me a second, please. God damn it. Give me a second. The role on the compensation, what role are you suggesting, Scott?
What role am I suggesting?
I'm going to put this in a form of a motion. So what role are you supporting?
What role am I supporting?
Yes, what do you think his role should be in a brief thumbnail? And I'm going to put this into a motion.
That the deputy supervisor acts in my absence. Is able to act in my absence as the supervisor.
Okay, that's kind of, to me, that seems like an implied position. Okay, and so as of right now, there's no compensation.
Correct, not for the chief, for the deputy supervisor.
Scott, or Supervisor Bennett, what do you think is fair for compensation? Because I'd like to form this into a motion also.
Mm-hmm. I think, $1,000 a month.
I think because he's doing, okay, I think that's on the low end.
Well, I'm just saying that if the board went for 1,000 for me, then,
Okay, but I think that's on the low end, but
I do. I agree. Go ahead, Mr. Thomas.
Trustee supervisor, through you to Attorney Laddie. That means that I'm going to talk for those people that don't understand when I say that you're not allowed to talk to another trustee or another board member during an open meeting. You have to go through the chairperson, which would be the supervisor. So what I'm doing is I'm asking Scott that I can bypass his chair and speak directly with Attorney Laddie.
Yes, you may.
So, Scott.
Yes, you may.
Attorney Laddie, if I made a motion that said the deputy acts in the absence of the supervisor with the same authority, is that legal? Should I say that?
Yeah, that's fine. It's also, that's what's in the agreement.
Right. Yeah, I think we should use the agreement.
So the agreement's ready, except for compensation. And the personnel director is in the statute regarding the superintendent, and it means whatever the interpretation is of the MTA. The interpretation varies, but it's whatever authority Scott has as personnel director, then that's what Wiles would have in the absence of Scott. So pretty here. All you have to do is put a dollar amount. Your motion's already made for you.
Okay. So I would put this as the deputy. I'd like to make the motion that the deputy acts in the absence of the supervisor, and the compensation should be $2,000 a month. Is that legal?
Your motion is, and again, you're referring to the agreement that was forwarded to you guys that has what you just talked about in it, except that you're proposing to add $2,000 a month. So that's your motion?
Yeah. Well, yes, but I'd like to continue talking. I'd like to defend my motion. If that's true, if that's okay with you, Supervisor Bennett.
Go ahead.
I think that it's not fair to ask an employee to go and get trained in something, because he is going to have to go through a lot of training. He's going to have to put in a lot of his phone time, a lot more than Supervisor Bennett, a lot more than Supervisor Bennett. And he's trying to juggle two jobs. And all of us don't want him doing two jobs at all. We don't. We've had this discussion. I don't want him doing two jobs. But it's not fair to let him just lambast him with 90 hours worth of week, because I figure he's going to be studying at least 5 to 7 hours a day just to get caught up on the logistics of this. I don't think this is actually something that we can just go to the Red Book, and when we mention the Red Book to the public, what that is, it's an outline of duties and challenges for boards, supervisors, and it's a real easy thumb to. It's kind of like a clip notes for board members. So we all refer to it as the Red Book, obviously, because it's political. No, that's right. So that's my feeling, that I think you should get compensated $2,000. I think you should be, and I'm willing to. That's what I'd like to see happen. So I hope someone would second this, so that at least we can discuss it.
So your motion is $2,000 a month for the chief. and
Yes.
and go with this written job
Yeah.
description. I'll support
And
it
I'd
for.
like to get a
I'll-
second so we can discuss, you guys.
I'll support it for discussion. Any discussion?
If somebody thinks that the $2,000 is long, speak up or vote for it. I mean, it's not fair to let him do it by himself.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thomas. We'll move on to Mr. Massey. Need to unmute your line. There you go, Mr. Massey.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Massey.
I see Mr. Thomas have his line, Trustee Thomas has his line muted.
Yep.
He wanted to hear my comment.
Well, he can hear you. You just can't speak right now, but he can hear you.
Oh, he can? Okay. He said $2,000 a month. That actually comes out to be how much per week?
Roughly $500, I guess, if there's 4 weeks in a month, right?
But it's a little under that because you always get, just say, possibly 4.5 weeks in a month. Okay. When you start talking about compensation, I'll say this. I don't know how many of you guys have ever done extra work, how you look at it, but I've done it before. You actually put in a lot of hours because now, and let me just be honest with you, this is not a negative comment, this is a factual comment, and I'm quite sure the chief would say the same thing. He's going to have to put in a lot of hours, additional hours, to do his current position, number one position, which is police chief. So if something, whatever amount of time he spends at the township, he's going to have to make up that time with the police department after hours. So if you're talking about conversation, is that enough? I'm just asking the question. Do you feel as though that's enough? I would say, looking at, let me put an hour, attach an hour to it. I think the chief is going to be working 12 to 14-hour days based on what I'm hearing and based on my experience. At least 12 or 14 hours days. I just wanted to put that out there.
Well, again, the chief is going to operate in my absence, and I plan to be here. I plan to be here, but I know Mr. Thomas has had his hand up down here and writing notes, so it's for us to see. So I'll go ahead and unmute your line, Mr. Thomas. You need to unmute yourself.
Chair, I'd like to say something in your absence.
Okay.
And don't take this in a negative way. What you just said, I totally disagree with that. You do not know what the future holds. You do not know how many days you will be out. You can estimate what you think, but that doesn't tell you how many days you will be absent.
Yeah. Well, I received a message from Chief Wiles. He said that he would not accept more than what I'm receiving. But Mr. Thomas, you got to unmute. Okay, you're unmuted now. Go ahead. And then we'll go to Mr. Mansour and then Mr. Guzak.
I agree with Trustee Massey. You can't see the future in this case because I think you have a bike trip scheduled, and we know how those go.
I already took it. I already took that,
Okay.
and I'm fine.
So when you do the wages, these wages, I don't think he's going to be working that long all the time. I think he's still going to do it 10. He does a 10, 11-hour day now, I think.
Well,
That's what him and I have discussed in the past. I think he's going to rely a lot on the Captain Bowserman and his command staff, which is ample command staff that he can delegate more of his authority to. But when you look at compensation, I understand that Chief Wiles said that $1,000
Mr. Mansour?
So thank you. So two points here. First, I do want to go back to this in the absence. So I mean, every time we've talked about this, this has been characterized as only when basically when the supervisor is gone. So the idea of having someone spend lots and lots of time here is just kind of antithetical to that. Also, in terms of thinking about training time, I mean, one of the reasons that I think Supervisor Bennett picked Chief Wiles is because he was up and ready to roll. Otherwise, it would have been better, to have someone on an interim basis. So, I mean, I kind of look at those two, and I can't, kind of see them meshing together. But my going in position here, and I think this was discussed from the last couple of times, is that, I mean, I do think that the chief has a full-time position working the township. He's got a number of officers he says he needs to hire, and so these additions put a strain on him. So that was my input. Thank you.
Yeah, I do not see any additional training needed. The chief is very well educated and a leader in his department, so I see nothing that needs to be trained as far as coming over to the township occasionally to meet, so and maybe take care of an issue. But Mr. Guzak, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I would like to make a motion that I know he is just in your absence, like you said, and most deputies do not make what the supervisor makes. I mean, my deputy doesn't make what I make, so I'm making a motion that we compensate him $500 a month and use the contract that Mr. Laddie has presented.
Okay. We've got a motion on the floor currently. Mr. Thomas, you need to unmute your line.
Well, then let's vote on it then.
Yep.
Yeah, I would be willing, if the board would be willing, I'd be willing to drop it down to $1,500. I could change my motion as long as Mr. Bennett, who seconded my motion, would agree with that. I think $500. I think $500 is too low.
Well,
I think that's more about.
Actually, the chief has indicated that he will not take more than what I receive. So,
Okay, well then let's stick with the $1,000 and just get this over with and move on. We're screwing around with pennies.
I'll accept the change, Miss Lane, and then Mr. Massey. Miss Lane?
Mr. Chair, I agree with Mr. Guzak. I believe it's an interim thing. I want Chief Wiles to spend his time taking care of the new hirees and looking into that particular part of his responsibility. And therefore, I would be more in favor of the $500, realizing it's in the absence of the supervisor.
Okay, let's take a vote on Mr. Thomas's, Mr. Massey. Go ahead.
Hey, Mr. Chair, I have a question for the attorney.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like for the attorney to comment on whatever we are giving the chief, that clause in his contract, does that clause become voided, or how is that clause effective?
The way it's really written, there is no change to the chief's current police chief contract. That contract is not altered at all.
So I have a question now, Attorney Laddie. So I just want to make sure that we cover all our bases, okay? Now, if there's a catastrophic situation in the police department and the chief is on township business, and there's a real situation at the township, so you got two situations, what do you do? That are very demanding. What do you do? How does the contract affects that? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. The chief's primary responsibility to Grand Blanc Township is that as police chief. His secondary responsibility is to the township as the deputy supervisor. And so my suggestion to Chief Wiles, if there's ever a situation where he has to choose between the two, then he handle the duties of police chief before the duties of supervisor. And if for example, there is a need for both at the same time, and the chief, that is an extremely rare example, and particularly when Mr. Bennett's unavailable, but I think the chief would prioritize his duties as police chief first.
And I think if there was a pending emergency here, we have several department heads, we have a clerk and the treasurer here as well. So I think any emergency could be handled in that regard here. Same with
Mr. Chair.
Same with, let me respond, and same with in the police department. The police chief is not available 24/7. In his absence, he has a command staff that acts in his absence. So, Mr. Massey, go ahead and wrap it up and let's move on. We've got a whole agenda full of items.
I have a question for the attorney, Mr. Chair.
Let's make it brief.
Should that be documented in this agreement that his first priority is the police, as police chief?
It can be, if that's with the board.
I think that should be documented in this agreement.
Are you proposing an amendment to the agreement that states that, and otherwise?
Yes. Yes.
Well, it would be up to Mr. Thomas and Mr. Bennett.
I don't see Mr. Thomas. Need to unmute. Need to unmute your line, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Massey's asking to add a clause to the agreement that says that the police chief will, his first priority is the police department. Would you accept that change in the agreement?
I'm thinking. I hate pigeonholing people, but if that's what it'll take to get Mr. Trustee Massey's vote for the $1,000, yes, I'll go with that.
I'll support it as well.
When people are having a pyramid style of leadership, but that's fine.
Okay, I'll go along with it. Let's take a vote on this motion because I have a feeling that we may be taking another vote here. Ms. Lane, go ahead.
All right.
And if you can report the motion, repeat the motion, Ms. Lane, so everybody knows what we're voting on.
All right. Compensation for the deputy supervisor would be $1,000 a month. That the proposed deputy township supervisor employment agreement be amended with his first priority is to be chief of police. Is that acceptable to those motions and makers?
Sure. Mr. Thomas already accepted it.
All
Go
right.
ahead, Ms. Lane.
Mr. Thomas?
Need to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Mr. Mansour?
No.
Mr. Guzak?
No.
Myself, no. Mr. Chair?
Yes. Does anybody else wish to make a motion? Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, I'd like to make the motion, like I stated before, that we take the amended agreement and $500 a month for the deputy supervisor.
What do you mean by amended agreement?
Well, the amended agreement, I thought it was amended that his first priority was to be the chief of police.
Okay. If that's what you want in your motion, then we'll add it. Okay. Ms. Lane?
I would support that motion.
Any other discussion on that? Go ahead, Ms. Lane. I'm sorry, Mr. Thomas?
Can you repeat the complete motion?
The motion would be that the compensation for the deputy township supervisor would be $500 a month, and that his agreement would be amended to read that his first priority is to be chief of police.
You ready to add Dan Potter? Okay, it was seconded. Mr. Thomas?
I'll be voting no on that amendment, and the reason why I'll be voting no on that, I think when we have the size of budget we have, and were playing games around $500 a month, when he's going to be filling in and doing buying $1,000 a month, and we're playing games over $500, which is a quarter of a penny of our budget, and destroying morale even worse than it is. And I don't know. To me, it's a slap in the face. I totally disagree, and I really wish this board would give them the $1,000 a month. That's why I'll be voting no on this motion.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Just to one last comment is that it's in my absence that you'll be acting. You know, the chief will do this job regardless of what the pay is. I told him that I wasn't sure I was going to pay anything. The same goes for me, that I know that we paid Mickey Hoffman, the previous supervisor, a little bit more than that when she took over, but I'm fine. I'm not doing this for the money, so I'm going to do it. But anyways, go ahead, Ms. Lane. Let's call for the vote and move on. We've got a full agenda here.
All right, I called for Mr. Thomas's vote, so
He said he'll be voting no. I don't know if that was his
We have
vote.
to hear it.
I thought that was his vote. You need to unmute. You need to unmute your line, Mr. Thomas. We're moving on to the vote.
I absolutely voted no, and I gave the reason for voting no. It's the fair thing.
thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Massey,
Yes.
Mr. Mansour,
No.
Mr. Guzak,
Yes.
myself, yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
That passes on a 4-2 vote, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you. This time the board will discuss the water rate study, and we'll also talk about the use of well water for irrigation. Mr. Beller, can we add in Director Sears, DPW Director Jeff Sears, and our consultant Dan Potter? Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Oh, okay.
So anyways, I know Mr. Mansour had a specific question with regard to the, I don't know, go ahead, Mr. Mansour, you can state your question as you provided it.
Right. So at the last meeting for us to document via email what our questions were about the rate study, and just to put a thumbnail it for this one, we received a month or two ago, but resent to us the latest Retellus basically spreadsheet where it goes in and talks about I guess some thoughts about usage, and just kind of lays out for us what the current estimate is, and what I asked for in that email was 2 points, because we only have this single point of comparison, and what I was looking for was the initial starting point that we received. I think it was last fall, in fact, and the assumptions there, then forward to this latest, and then a discussion of what the changes were in the assumptions. And to the best of my knowledge, I haven't received those. So if we're able to go through that now, fine. And if we're not, the question's still open. You know, what were the initial assumptions? What were the new assumptions, and the rationale for the movement, the change?
So I'm not sure, Mr. Sears or Mr. Potter. Mr. Sears?
Mr. Supervisor, if I could, we discussed this on Monday. I apologize, I was on vacation last week, or Mr. Supervisor, I was on vacation last week, so I wasn't in on Friday when Al's email came through. So I haven't had time to prepare that documentation. Basically where we're at right now, and I just want to give just a little bit of a repeat here. Where we're at right now is the rate study is very close to complete. What we sent you is the rate model, which is what we're going to use to establish rates from year to year. The rate study is mostly complete. The last thing that needs to be done is an executive summary, if you will, from Raftalis that basically sums up all of their findings. If you recall, back in March, Mr. Potter gave a presentation regarding irrigation, and at that time, we had reported that we put Raftalis on hold because of COVID-19. We didn't want to necessarily finish up the rate study because we didn't know what the implications of the possible economy fallout would be. So what I would propose to the board, so that you can get some closure on this, is to go ahead and have Raftalis finish this up, prepare that executive summary, and then we could deliver that to the board to accept and file with any recommendations.
What kind of time frame would you be talking about, Mr. Sears?
We can definitely get with Raftalis on this quickly and see how quickly we can get it done, maybe by the end of September, early October at the latest.
So tell me a little bit about, maybe if you or Mr. Potter can talk a little bit about assumptions and what those are for the public as well as the board.
Some of the things that we use to work through the rate study are things like water usage, the number of customers, the number of units we have in the system, and what our projections are for coming years. Also, what our current rates are, what our current rate structure is, and how that could possibly change in the future too. And also our capital projects, our current operating costs, utilities, labor, and everything like that, and how we expect to change in the future, so we can best prepare the rates for years to come.
So I think, part of the challenge was in terms of the assumptions, and I'll get to next, Mr. Thomas. I think challenge with regard to the assumptions is that during this economic, I'll call it just upheaval that's going on right now with the shutdown, and not sure where things are going with development. Certainly we have a number of developments that are finishing, but we're looking at what may be coming down the road here. And also we're looking at delinquencies possibly of paying water bills. We're looking at that. So there's lots of variables that you have to have a crystal ball to figure out even what the county intends to do with regard to their rates, because we're subject to that. I can say that being part of the Water and Sewer Advisory Board, they don't see any rate increase coming in the next year at a minimum from the county in terms of water. Sewer might be another story. Just as a side note, the water, we probably would see a decrease in the future, except that the problem is with the utilities, the electricity that's used, what have you. We have no control. The Carignan, Genesee County Water and Waste has no control over what those utility costs are, and that's probably the biggest driver of rates at this point, from what I understand. The other thing that's driving some of the costs in the future, I don't know if anybody follows the issue with PFAS, but there's, if everybody's familiar with PFAS, I won't have to explain it, but it's a chemical that many manufacturers were putting into everything from cosmetics to carpeting to clothing. Here in the U.S., they've pretty much banned, I believe, Mr. Sears, the use of PFAS, but the problem is that everything that's imported still has those in it. What's happening is that the state is requiring, or the federal government is requiring, that the water that they're cleaning, the sewerage, has to eliminate just about any, I don't know, what was the parts per billion? I know Mr. Potter or Mr. Sears probably know that, but it's...
Drinking water is 8 parts per trillion.
Right, but even in our outgoing sewer water, it's going to have to be eliminated, right?
That's what they're talking about. They haven't got there yet.
Yeah, which may drive future rates as well, right, Mr. Potter?
That's possible.
So all those things have to factor into our future rates. Mr. Thomas, I know you've had your hand up. Go ahead.
So, Kurt, am I unmuted?
Yeah. Yes.
Through you to Trustee Mansour. Is that okay?
Well, I'll go ahead and ask your question, and then we'll go from there.
Trustee Mansour, when did we start this? Was it a year and 9 months ago? Can you unmute Trustee Mansour?
He's not muted, I don't believe.
couldn't exactly hear the question. Yeah.
I was wondering when the start date is.
Maybe this is my connection.
Mr. Sears,
But I think we initially started talking about this last fall. I don't that month.
right. So we're into this fall. So
My problem is that none of us are procrastinator. We're just not. And same thing. I've spoken to Commissioner Wright. I've talked to him. I've talked to his assistant, his associate, and what number Director Sears are we up to? What revision? 15 did I hear? 14?
No, we haven't had that many revisions. There's not necessarily revisions to the document. It's going to consistently change forever.
Right, exactly. My point is, pick a number and let's pick. I'd like to see a snapshot and take that snapshot, and that's it. That's what the board asked for when I asked for this stuff a year and months ago. And all the residents came in a year and 9 months ago and asked for us to allow them to dig irrigation wells. And we said, well, you know what? We promise you, folks, we will get that rate study done. And the next meeting, I made a motion and said, and I'll pull it out. I said, the board, I want a snapshot, and we'll go with that numbers to see if we can actually afford the residents to dig their own wells for irrigation purposes. That's what this whole thing's about. Yeah. And, you know, if it's not right, that it's been going on this long, you know, in the words of Larry Anderson early during his citizen comment, we spent 3 times as much time as this than we do the budget.
all right, thank you, Mr. Thomas.
No, I'm not done. I'm not done.
Well, please be concise because we've got a long meeting ahead of us.
I am. Okay, then I'm going to make a motion. I just wanted to discuss this before I do make a motion that I don't want to make. We're looking at how we can afford this, if the township can afford this. You know, back in September and October of 2018, we disconnected our water line at the park, at Bicentennial Park. We disconnected the township water that we were paying for at Bicentennial Park, and we dug our own well for irrigation purposes for the new soccer field fix. And that's breaking our own ordinance. And on top of that, you're there, Lehman was there, and I know that he directed you to be there to supervise the well to be done. And it's not fair that we, as a township board, and I just want to remind everybody on this board that was never brought to the board to spend that expenditure. The thing that was brought to this board was about $65,000 for soccer field improvements. So we've actually broken our own accord, and that's what I want. I want to know if we can afford to let the residents, because obviously we couldn't afford it. We couldn't afford to pay our water rate for irrigation.
We're going to move on.
Done.
I'm not going to allow the continuing of this. If you have something concise to say, then fine, but we're not going to keep going like this. Mr. Sears is, in terms of irrigation.
I want to make the motion
Mr. Sears, in terms of irrigation.
I'll just sit down and unmute myself too.
You know what? I will expel Mr. Thomas. You know what? I will expel you from the meeting if you don't stop. I am going to expel you from the meeting if you don't stop. You either stop or I will expel you from the meeting. Mr. Sears, can you talk about the irrigation at the park and what, do you have any history on that? You need to unmute yourself, Mr. Sears. Go ahead.
We did, for the new multi-purpose field, a well was drilled for that project. Mr. Thomas is right that myself and Mr. Limita were here, but we were not part of the planning of that project. At the time, Parks and Rec is the ones that worked with the engineering firm to plan for that project. That's all, you know, a well was drilled for that. And yeah,
But there wasn't,
right.
but there wasn't water there prior to that. It was a new well.
There
right?
was not, for that field, there was not currently an irrigation system that was connected to public
Right.
water for that field.
And so for individuals that are not connected for irrigation, we allow them to connect to a well for irrigation. It's existing accounts that we don't
Water
have.
line from the township was connected out there then, Director Sears.
There
The one
was,
that
Mr. Thomas, if you don't stop the outbursts, I'm going to ask you to leave the meeting.
as a
If
point
you
of
want to be,
history,
if you want to be recognized, you let me know and we will recognize you. But I'm not going to have you jumping in like this. I will call on you in just a moment. Mr. Sears, continue.
Mr. Thomas is correct. Back in the early, I couldn't even give you a date. I want to say it was in 2008 or so. The soccer fields were once watered by municipal water, and they were disconnected. But that was back in the late 2000s, 2008 or something like that. So I think that's what he's alluding to, and he is correct about that. The well that we're referring to right now was drilled only for the brand new multi-purpose field that was put in the past 2 years.
Okay.
We have been allowing individual residents to drill wells for irrigation systems.
That are not they are not allowed to disconnect though.
Correct. They're
Question.
not allowed to disconnect their domestic service.
So one last question to clarify for Mr. Thomas. One of the things he stated was that can we afford to allow people to disconnect from municipal water for their irrigation?
Back in March, Dan Potter gave a presentation in regards to that. In our estimates, please excuse me, that was back in March, but I believe our estimates were around a possible $300,000 a year reduction in revenue due to the loss of irrigation, but that's hard to tell because we don't know the impact on how many people would actually disconnect.
Okay, we'll go back to Mr. Thomas and then Mr. Mansour. You need to unmute your own line, Mr. Thomas.
I appreciate the answer. I'm very, 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 very frustrated. I've been frustrated with this water study. Jeff had nothing to do with you. I know that you're a director and you were directed to do this, but it's not fair what's going on with this rate study. And I just want it done. I just want it done so we can do what we promised our residents. We promised our residents an answer, and we haven't given it to them in a year and 10 months. I'm sorry I'm frustrated. I apologize, Scott, for my frustration, but I just had it. Thank you.
Mr. Sears, do you want to clarify? And then we'll go to Mr. Mansour.
Yeah, and I agree with Mr. Thomas. Obviously, I'd like to see this completed myself. For a little bit of clarification, by the time we negotiated the contract with Raptalis, we kicked off the rate study approximately October 1st of 2019. It was largely completed by the end of February, and we were ready to prepare that executive summary in March until COVID-19 hit. And we actually had Raptalis scheduled to come and do a presentation to the board, but they couldn't travel once the restrictions were put in. So we were within their time window of getting this done within 6 months, but we didn't feel comfortable finishing it up, not knowing what the future was going to hold. I think at this point it would be a good idea to go ahead and do that, though.
Mr. Mansour, and then we'll go back to you, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Mansour?
To me?
Yes.
Okay. So, Supervisor Bennett, and I guess for Director Sears as well. I think that what we understood as a board here is that we had a study that was basically ready to be completed in the February-March timeframe, and then that was just about the time COVID was hitting. So here we are 5 months later, still not done. And so that's, you can understand that that's completely dissatisfying. And a lot of other people have been able to complete their work, kind of making workarounds and being able to do their job. So I don't really view that as kind of an excuse for this. So this is, for me, it's been dragging on for some kind of unknown reason. And the other point I wanted to make about the use of water wells for irrigation, and this was actually an interesting point that Director Sears brought up early on in this process. I think it was before the end of the year, where we talked about a ready-to-serve charge. And it was very interesting because when the consultant delivered his report, I think it was February 11th, the idea that ready-to-serve fee was immaterial was kind of the impression we were left with. So based on the kind of discrepancy between I saw the director and the consultant, I made a couple of calls myself to Drain Commissioner and to his deputy, and find out that, in fact, the ready-to-serve charges that we are exposed to because of a higher use, because of summer weather, watering lots of lawns, actually kicks us up into a higher rate usage. So it actually, by not having a lot of these larger facilities on irrigation, the township gets kicked into a higher level of ready-to-serve charge to the tune of about $25,000 a month, if I recall that. So over the course of a year, it costs us, between $250,000 and $300,000 to be in this, which is basically what I understood the offset or the potential downside from the consultant. So if you take a look at keeping our ready-to-serve fees lower, basically there's a no cost to the township. Again, rolling in the ready-to-serve when talking to the county. So in that respect, I guess, wasting treated water that's fluorinated and chlorinated to water ponds and common areas doesn't make sense to me. So that's really the big reason for me to push this, because it doesn't make sense and because it really doesn't impact cost to the township.
Mr. Potter or Mr. Sears, do you want to respond? Mr. Potter?
There is additional revenues that are created by that irrigation for the township. It's not just a complete wash, but that's a valid point, and we've talked about this an awful lot of times and given you the numbers that we have available. It's just a board decision whether you want to allow irrigation to disconnect or not disconnect.
Well, when the rate study, I think what we said is when the rate study is finished, but the other thing is, I just want to state this, that, the rate study, as Mr. Sears said, was ready for presentation back several months ago. It wasn't that these people stopped working. It was that the assumptions, we didn't, with the shutdown of every business around for at least a month, and then the slow opening, there's businesses still aren't open. When you're looking at assumptions, nobody's sure what to assume with regard to usage. Hopefully we're getting to a point now where things are stabilizing a little bit, and we'll see, what comes back and what doesn't. But we're still watching our receivables. Property taxes, I think, are also going to take a hit in the receivable department. I'm hearing from business owners that, they're going to wait till they're open at a minimum before they start even paying property taxes. And I would imagine it's probably going to be the same for any outstanding water bills. Mr. Thomas had his hand up, and then we'll go to Mr. Massey. Go ahead and unmute your line, Mr. Thomas.
Through you to Director Sears. Director Sears, the rate study I'm looking at right here in my hand was provided by you to me and former Superintendent Limita. The one I have takes June started. Mine starts June 17th. So when you said that the rate study started, 6 months past that, that doesn't fly. My I would like to, before we get out of our term, I would like to give this, to find out if we can actually do this for the residents and stop kicking the can down the road. That's
Okay.
all I want. And if
All right.
you and I want to sit down and hash it out, that's great. That's
Okay.
what we need. We have to do this for the residents because we promise.
All right,
Thank
thanks.
you.
Well, this rate study, I don't know if it's required by law, but we typically do one every, 5 years, Mr. Sears?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I would like to make a motion to have Attorney Laddie to write up the ordinance to state what Trustee Mansur has stated and Trustee Thomas have said that, and based on Director Sears' comment, is that he write up the ordinance where the residents that want wells can only have a well for lawn service, irrigation system only. No municipal, they cannot connect from the municipal water system.
I'm not sure I understand that, but Mr. Sears?
Just for clarification, Mr. Supervisor, are we talking about resident for new irrigation systems or to allow residents to disconnect existing irrigation systems for irrigation?
I'm not sure.
Only existing. I mean, disconnect existing system and they can drill a well, but they still have to use municipal water.
For their domestic?
Yeah, for their domestic use. I'd like for that motion to be made that Mr. Laddie put that into the ordinance. Then when we get to the rate study, whatever it says, we're all ready to go if we choose to go that way.
Mr. Sears?
Mr. Supervisor, I believe Trustee Mansour did send us some recommended language last winter, and I think maybe perhaps we could look at that with Attorney Laddie and craft something that appeases the board.
Well, Mr. Massey's made a motion, but I'd just say that, we've had recommendations against it from a number of professionals, and I would vote no on moving that direction. But especially even before we have the rate study. But I understand Mr. Massey saying to have it ready, to not necessarily take action until we have the rate study. But anyways, that's my thoughts. Ms. Lane?
I would support Mr. Massey's motion to have the ordinance prepared by the attorney to allow the water usage from wells and disconnect from municipal water use.
Okay.
Irrigation.
Mr. Thomas? You need to unmute your line. You need to unmute your line, Mr. Thomas.
It just popped up, Scott, for Supervisor Bennett. This is the motion that I didn't want to read. This is the reason why I just want the rate study and the snapshot done, and you and I get a big diatribe whose turn it is to talk. But this is the motion I didn't want to read. This is what I just really would like to do a snapshot of the rate study and be prepared to maybe next month to do the motion, the resolution, and the ordinance change through you to Clerk Lane. How long does it take to do a resolution? Do we have to, not a resolution, a ordinance, we have to print it in the case?
Well, I'm going to ask that we take care of this motion first. We've got a motion on the floor, it's been seconded. And in terms of other resolutions, if this one fails, we can look at whatever. But I think it was seconded, right, Ms. Lane?
Yes, sir, I seconded Mr.
Okay.
Massey's motion.
Okay. So go ahead and let's call for the vote.
Can you clarify the vote?
You mean the
motion was that Attorney Laddie draft an ordinance amendment that would allow residents to disconnect their irrigation system from municipal water and dig wells.
Related to that motion, we don't know whether this is going to increase the cost to residents for water or not at this point without having a rate study in front of us. We also heard from a number of residents in public comment that they do not want this board making decisions that have long-lasting effects. I couldn't think of a motion that would have more long-lasting effects than this. Once you make this change, you cannot go back. And we have no idea how many people will make the switch or decide to dig a well, if you want to put it that way, for irrigation. So I think it's misguided to go this route for a number of reasons. But with that, Ms. Lane, go ahead and call for the vote.
Mr. Massey,
Yes.
Mr. Mansour,
Yes.
Mr. Guthak,
No.
Mr. Thomas,
We can't hear you, Mr. Thomas. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
I'm going to vote yes because we owe it to the residents that we promised an answer to.
I don't have all the facts.
yes for myself, Mr. Supervisor.
No, absolutely not.
It passed 4-2, Mr. Chair.
Okay. With that, we'll move on to the third item on the agenda. The board will discuss an update on special assessment districts, and that is an update on where we're at on those. Mr. Laddie, I know that you and Mr. Sears have had some conversation. I believe that we probably need to schedule some hearings for those. Is that correct?
You're exactly right. Working with Mr. Guzak and Mr. Sears and with you, Mr. Supervisor, and also our bond counsel, Roger Sweats, we have, I don't want to say resurrected, but again, for the period that we were directed to limit our agendas as much as we could during the COVID situation, which is still ongoing, we put off required public hearings for Grand Wailea, Red Lake Estates, Granville Estates, and then also the district that we call the Meadowlark Special Assessment District. And so because we're running up against the deadline of making sure that we have all of our assessment districts in place so that we can begin to recover the money for the districts, that deadline is December 1st. We need to give our administration time to calculate and include those amounts on the December tax bills. So I think we got to have all of these wrapped up at the latest, I want to say by mid-November. And we need then, as we have 4 public hearings, primarily approving proposed rules for those 4 special assessment districts, and also to pass reimbursement resolutions where if the township has advanced some money to the road commission to get a project underway, or even in some circumstances perhaps completed the work, we need to make sure that we get to pay ourselves back the money that we extended. And so what you're going to see is up in the upcoming meetings, you're going to see the setting of the 4 separate public hearings, and probably 4 separate resolution paybacks. My office will work with again Director Sears, and by the way, Director Sears gathered this information together and put it in a nice to follow format. So I appreciate that. We'll work with his department, with Ms. Lane and Mr. Bennett, Supervisor Bennett, to make sure that we schedule these with enough time for notice. I think we're probably, at least for the foreseeable future, or the first couple of these hearings, we'll probably be doing them by remotely, which I know has its challenges, but we're frankly running out of time. So you're going to start seeing those on the agenda. You'll see notices being set. We'll provide you with information. Residents will get letters inviting them to participate in these public hearings, and we will make sure that we've got everything in order in time for the winter tax bills.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Laddie. The other item on this subject was with regard to discussing financing for private roads. I know that our task force discussed this, and it was your opinion, Mr. Laddie, that if we were to do that, it should be a separate policy from the one that we have currently on roads. Mr. Mansour is joining us again. I dropped off, but Mr. Mansour, you wanted to add it to the agenda to talk about HOAs and private roads, including so review of enablers to allow HOAs, including private roads, to establish SADs. Can you hear us, Mr. Mansour?
Yeah, I'm sorry, my connection must not be very good for some reason, and in fact, I was off for the last 2 or 3, 4 minutes. So I'm sorry, would you please repeat what you just said?
Well, Mr. Laddie gave us an update on where we're at with our current special assessment districts, and that we're going to be scheduling some public hearings, but with regard to those. But we're on to the subject of that you wanted included regarding review of enablers to allow HOAs, including those involving private roads, to establish SADs, or special assessment districts.
Right. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the point is this: we had some previous discussions about this. That a number of, well, actually most of the developments in the last 5-10 years in the township have been basically kind of planned unit developments with homeowner association running them eventually, and in fact basically acting kind of as I guess acting as the group that's responsible for for organizing and getting the roads together when it comes time to repair and maintain roads. And we've been offering as a township a special assessment district for the standard, county road one.
We're losing you, Mr. Mansour. We can't. Yeah, Mr. Mansour, we cannot. Yeah, we lost you on that. We're losing you, Mr. Mansour. I'm going to go ahead and
try phone.
Mr. Thomas. I don't think you can't hear us.
Put the homeowner association in position.
Mr. Mansour, we are unable to hear you at this point, Mr. Mansour.
That tier was. Can you hear me?
No, we're having difficulty hearing you at all, so we could not hear. Mr. Guzak?
Yeah, maybe he could call in on his telephone, and that way at least you could hear him speak. And maybe that wouldn't cut out on us. Is that a possibility?
If he wants to do that, I guess we could do that, but he'll try to reestablish his connection.
Okay. Looks like we lost him completely.
Yeah, we did once before as well.
Okay.
Mr. Supervisor?
Yes, Mr. Laddie?
I think, this is a topic that we had discussion with, way back when we created a committee to create a road financing policy, and we talked about this issue before. And I think what Mr. Mansour is proposing is that we again try to reconsider whether or not we want to arrange for the financing for road projects that are private roads that are subdivisions, and that certainly can be done. We talked about that again when we formed that committee, and we can talk about it again. Well, and there are pluses and minuses. The pluses are that the minuses that we're not in the road building business, and it puts a little more burden on Mr. Sears and his department. By the way, I mean, they're very capable, but we're never going to be eligible with the road building company or the county. The other thing we talked about is requiring if we did do this, requiring anybody in a private road special assessment to engage an engineering company to do inspections, but also to make sure that they're getting what they pay for, and that they're buying enough road, basically. And then finally, I guess, and so that's the downside. The upside is that if we take on this responsibility, and it would be at the cost of the homeowners, that I mean, they're also not road builders, right? And they don't know what they need, and they don't know how much it would cost. So I think the idea of maybe trying to facilitate this with a little bit more involvement is something that you could consider. Yeah. We haven't done it in the past, but if you want to do it, we could probably put that in place.
I think if we're going to look at it even, I think we need to reconvene our road task force, because I think we need to outline what the pluses and minuses are. I am not in favor of putting our DPW director, Jeff Sears, in the middle of this. He's not a road builder. We didn't hire him to build roads. And even the fact that we hire an engineer, a private firm, to be in charge, we're still going to be to blame if things don't turn out right on those projects. We don't own the roads. The county doesn't own the roads. And for us to get in the middle of that, I think is going to be have potential liability for us. Mr. Massey, you need to unmute yourself.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
When the street task force met, I don't know whether you recall or not, but I vaguely recall that we looked at the financing part, and we thought that it would be a benefit to the township. And at that point, that the township is in business to, should be in business to help every resident that lives, every resident as much as possible. So we wouldn't be in the road business. We would be assisting the township resident that has a private road to finance that road for them, and we could actually get the benefit from financing that. Yeah. But we wouldn't be in the business of building the road now.
Yeah. Well, I don't recall us making. We can't make money on the deal. I don't believe.
Yeah, right.
And Mr. Laddie is agreeing with me, I believe. So being a money-making venture, I don't think that's in it. But I think, if we want to go this route, we can have we can hold another road task force meeting and flesh out for the board what those positives and negatives are. I hesitate to spend an hour on the subject right now, but let the task force meet again, and we can outline the pluses and minuses and bring it to the board, and at that point make a decision based on the facts.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I agree to what you're saying, but can I make a comment? Anytime you're an elected official, if you're just being elected to do what people have done in the past and don't be creative, then you're really not a good elected official. Any good leader is being creative. This is a creative opportunity for us to look at in the task force meeting. Okay?
All right. Thanks.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to refer it to a task force. We have a roads task force, and Ms. Lane, if you want to put that in the minutes, we will schedule a meeting and get the task force together with Mr. Laddie and talk it over again. Okay. Let's see. We added a couple of things to the agenda. So the next item was Mr. Guzak asked that we add to the agenda with regard to, let's see here. Let's see. We said that the new superintendent discussion would take place at this point. So
No, I think it was supposed to be the labor attorney.
Okay. All right. We can talk about that. Go ahead, Mr. Guzak.
Yeah, did you? I know at the last meeting you said that you'd get some information of what was paid in 2020. Were you able to get that, or?
Not yet, because actually what we have to do is we have to go through all of the invoices and actually look at the notes for the bills because they all aren't for police negotiations. So we need to separate those out and total those up. I've had, I think the meeting was last week, and I was out for a couple of days, and so was my administrative assistant. I've talked with Kathy Solstack, and she said that she will get us those invoices so that we can total what that amount is.
Okay.
So.
And then the other thing is it possible that we could at least go out for bids just to see if we're getting a clear amount of money to see if our bond attorney was in range or not?
Yeah.
Well, our labor attorney, don't you, Earl?
Yeah.
Yes, the labor attorney.
Well,
because right now we don't know. We might be getting a good deal. We might not. So I think if we just went out for bids just to see, we don't have to decide. We just want to know where we're at to see if it's competitive, and then you can get the other items. We don't have.
Well, I'd like to make a few comments with regard to our labor attorney. In that I haven't heard any concern from any board members, including you, Mr. Guzak, regarding the potential cost to the township for the lawsuit that's been brought to us by Mr. Limita. And it seems like if there really was a financial concern, that'd be part of the discussion. The townships that I've spoken with have told me that the premiums will skyrocket after this lawsuit. But I guess it'll be the next board that has to deal with paying those costs. Also, I've never heard a word about the tons of thousands of dollars that our former superintendent, Limita, saved us with union negotiations compared to what our previous contracts cost to negotiate. He was able to save us significant money and did a phenomenal job reducing our unfunded obligations through his negotiations with the police unions. We've now spent about 3 or 4 meetings debating the description of what my deputy supervisor will be allowed to handle in my absence, but the board was ready to fire a labor attorney at the drop of a hat. It wasn't on the agenda, never discussed at a meeting prior, and no plan for replacement. No review of the purchasing policy, which dictates how we choose an attorney, and no reviewing the fees, no interviewing prospective replacements. Looks like another violation of the Open Meetings Act to me. But let me review some of the legal work that our labor attorney has done that may shed some light on why some board members may want to fire this attorney. Bodman wrote a legal opinion at my request, which by state statute is within my authority, that warned this board against their wanting to take on the responsibility of hiring the director and staff for the new Parks and Recreation Department. Mind you, the reason they took over the operation of Parks and Recreation was because they did not have skilled professionals in human resources. Somebody's unmuted themselves here. We took it over because they did not have, I'll get to you, Mr. Guzak. They did not have skilled professionals in human resources. The legal opinion outlined the state statute that would be violated by overstepping the authority of the supervisor and superintendent. The opinion also outlined the fact that it would also violate our own township hiring policy. This would open the township to several avenues of potential liability. Bodman also wrote correspondence at our request, or my request, rebuking several board members that are now named in a lawsuit for interfering with the police contract negotiations. The correspondence named dates, times, and individuals, and that was the second time board members had been warned of the interference. The trustees are attempting also to create a narrative that the labor attorney and the former superintendent worked to delay the police contract from being completed to try and hurt those trustees politically. In reality, what caused the delay in the contract negotiations were several issues. The police reaction to the $4,000 bonus the board voted themselves, the COVID-19 shutdown, the demeaning and insulting questioning of the police chief regarding the purchase of defibrillators and bulletproof vests, and the board's illegal interference in the negotiation process. Now tell me why the trustees are in favor of firing the labor attorney. It appears that they do not like people who point out the law when they violate it or policy when it's violated. So that's my opinion of why we're even looking at Bodman. Mr. Guzak?
All I said is I just wanted to do
I know.
review of see what our costs were to see if he was in line or not in line. Okay? It had nothing to do with all the other stuff you were saying,
Right.
but I see your point. So we don't have the numbers yet, so we'll have to discuss it when you get the numbers, right?
I'll get the numbers.
Then we can consider possibly doing a bid, just because if they're a good company, we don't have to fire them. I'm not talking about firing anybody. I'm just trying to get out of our cost base.
Well, we're in the middle of negotiation. I wouldn't think that's the time to switch horses.
Well, no, I think he was supposed to finish up the police negotiations and complete that one.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be, here again.
Yep. Well, take a look at the hiring policy. You'll see that the superintendent or supervisor makes the recommendation for the legal, whether it's for a municipal attorney or for the labor attorney. Mr. Thomas? Mr. Thomas?
The question of hiring and working with hiring and setting goals and job descriptions for the park director, the reason why there was an issue is because this board asked our municipality lawyer, David Laddie, for his opinion. Attorney Laddie gave his opinion. You, supervisor, on your own, did not agree with it, and you sought other legal opinions through Bogdan.
Totally wrong. Totally wrong.
Secondly, it's not fair to say that about the bulletproof vest, because that had nothing to do with the conversation. Mm-hmm. The conversation was about capital budget and operating budget. This board has never once, and I wish people stop lying, that we have never once told the police no. Never. This board has never questioned the budget for the police. We voted for the budget. My question and the board's question has only thing to do with the capital budget and the operational budget. And during that whole asking to Chief Wiles, we kept on saying this has nothing to do with you or your department. Yeah. We're just asking why there's two different spots. Why can't we just have it in the Capitol? And it's unfair, it's a lie for you to say that we were demeaning his bulletproof vest.
Well,
and if you want to go back on videotape, I'll bring the videotape up. I will.
Go ahead. The bottom line is that that is not true with regard to that I sought a separate opinion after Mr. Laddie gave his opinion. Actually, I provided the opinion that Bodman provided. I provided it to Mr. Laddie prior to his sending his opinion to the board. So he had it in advance by several days. And actually, I asked for two separate opinions. And it's well within my purview by state statute that I can ask for a legal opinion anytime I choose to, without board approval. But the bottom line is that I asked Mr. Laddie during the meeting to provide a legal opinion with regard to the state statute and who has the responsibility of the hiring and the management of day-to-day operations. I asked the Bodman attorneys to write an opinion on how this would handle, or how board taking over this responsibility would line up with the policy that this board had passed about 6 months prior with regard to our hiring policy, as well as the job contract or the position contract with our superintendent, which both would be violated by this board taking over those responsibilities of hiring and managing the parks. But the bottom line is, rather than get off in the weeds, I'm just saying I believe that there's some other things going on here besides just being concerned about cost with Bodman. I don't know that anybody has the comparison as to what we paid in the past for police negotiations with other law firms. I don't know that anybody has had experience with that and what the cost should be. Mr. Thomas? You are not unmute. You need to unmute yourself.
Supervisor Bennett, I apologize that I did not realize that was the steps, and that was never brought up in a full disclosure like you just did on the steps of what the rationale for you going up, and I apologize. That's the first I've ever heard the whole story.
Okay, well,
the Bodman is this is the first. I hope you accept my apologies, and I hope you don't get in the weeds anymore about the
I accept your apology. I accept your apology, but I did bring that up at prior meetings, but go ahead.
No, you didn't. So anyway, continuing, the Bodman situation with the waters, unfortunately, I missed the last meeting, and that came as a shock to me. I had no idea what that was about, and I watched the meeting, and I was not privy to any of that, Supervisor Bennett. So
Okay.
Nobody told me about it.
All right.
And goodbye.
So Mr. Guzak would like a copy or to know what the total is for the police negotiations. And we'll go through the invoices and since the negotiation began and figure out what those totals are. Go ahead.
Right. And then, can you also go back and check with our previous attorneys too?
I asked Ms. Solstak if we can go back that far. She wasn't sure. I mean, it's prior to her being here, but because I'm not sure that we have that detail of billing of what was police and what was just handling grievances and what have you. It predates Mr. Limita, but we will, we're investigating it.
Okay,
see.
great.
Okay. Mr. Massey? You need to unmute your line, Mr. Massey.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I've been in the finance business for a long time.
Okay.
Listen to you make a statement there. So let me sum up what I interpreted. You are telling us that in the township, in the past, we have not kept adequate financial record. That's what you're saying. I'm talking about from a financial perspective. You're supposed to have financial records at least for 7 years. That's the IRS. At least for 7 years, okay? Now, if we cannot go back and retrieve those records, that tells me that the township has not been keeping adequate financial records. I'm just basing that off of what you said.
Okay. I don't know. We're going to find out how far back the detail goes for labor attorney billings. Okay. So unless anybody else has anything else on that, we will get the detail on what the costs were for police negotiations and bring that to the board. Mr. Guzak, the other item that you had that you wanted to bring up was the hiring of a superintendent.
Right. I was wondering, did you have that meeting, that special meeting that was going to discuss the type of superintendent? Because I know there was three different phases. Mm-hmm. Was that able to be accomplished?
I asked the task force members to email me when they're available. I've not heard anything. I also heard from you that you said that you would rather have it be a full board meeting, and so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, but the last I heard, you were gonna call the meeting, so evidently nothing got done then, right?
So we can, whichever your pleasure is, if we want to have a task force or if we want to have a full board meeting, special meeting to talk about that issue, we can do that. Mr. Massey.
Okay, is it possible that the board could get a copy, at least a copy of the job description and all the places that we did post everything, so that we can review it and see if there's any details in there that we'd like to look at least to do some homework on that?
Sure. So job description that we used in the past and where it was posted.
Where it was posted and who we used, and I think we used Terry McGinnis, and I checked with him and he's retired now, so.
Right. There's a number of other firms that do it.
Right.
Who had their hand up here? I thought I saw somebody's hand. I guess, Mr. Massey. Go ahead. You're muted, Mr. Massey.
Mr. Chair, I heard you say something that caught my attention.
Okay.
The information that the treasurer is asking for, Mr. Earl Guzak, is asking for. Are you saying you're only going to provide us what Bartman Law Firm charged us just only for negotiating police contracts?
We're on to a new topic now, Mr. Massey, but that's what
I want to make this clear.
That's what he was asking for.
Contract.
Well, that's what Mr. Guzak requested, and so that's what I'll provide.
Well, can I amend that for all their fees so we can at least look at all the different contracts? Because that's what we're going to look at the other company for. Is that possible?
What, you want a detail of what we paid them for each thing, or what? Because there's miscellaneous things that we use them for as well.
I mean, just a recap of any negotiations for all the different ones compared to our previous attorney. So we'll have some kind of background there. And the only reason I wanted to bid out there was just to see what the current rate is right now, to see if we're in line or not.
Yeah. I will. I'll put together whatever information we can find and make it as detailed as possible. So let's continue on with this topic that we're on. Though I don't want to jump back and forth. If you have a comment, make sure you get it in. But Mr. Thomas, is your comment with regard to the superintendent position? Mr. Thomas, is your comment with regard to the superintendent position? You need to unmute. Go ahead.
No, I just got a real quick question. So the way that Treasurer Guzek's speaking, we did not. Did we fire Todd?
No.
I didn't think so. No. Okay, thank you for clearing that up. That's it.
Okay, so with regard to the hiring of a superintendent, I think we've all heard the comments from the incoming potential new board members, and actually one of the new board members, about moving forward with hiring the new superintendent or manager or whatever you want to classify, this board wants to classify the board as. But as I mentioned, I asked for you to email me the dates. We'll set up a meeting with the task force if you want. But first of all, let me set out the description and who we used, and we can decide to go from there. So anyways, I think, I've stated at prior meetings that I'm not in favor of this board starting the process for hiring a replacement for this fired superintendent. I know we had one person that in public comment that said that we need to get the ball rolling, but not that necessarily we take a poll with our public to find out. But I think that, with me and Mr. Massey excluded, the remaining members of this board have less than 3 months to serve, and that equates to about 6 board meetings before the November election. But if the board, insists on moving forward in this direction, I need to warn you that I'm not going to be in favor of this process. And I'll let it be known right now that any candidates for the position, if we decide that we're going to hire for this position or do what have you, I'm going to let them know, as well as Mr. Robertson, that these decisions will be reversed on November 20th or whatever the first board meeting is. They take their seats November 20th. So any candidates should be prepared to not work past that date if this board decides to hire or set up this as a manager position or what have you. I think the next board should be having the discussion on whether or not we set up a manager position, a superintendent position, or hire back the previous, as it was mentioned by one potential board member, Mr. Limita. So that's where I stand on this. I'll be glad to have the meetings, but I'm not in favor of this board making hiring decisions with regard to the superintendent position or manager or whatever you want to call it. But I will send out that information as requested, Mr. Guzek. Okay. Unless anybody else has anything on that topic, we've got several more items on the agenda for this evening. Next item, the board will consider a motion to authorize the donation of obsolete ISI SCBAs, which is basically the breathing apparatus, spare cylinders, face mask, to the new Presque Isle Fire Department, with Balfour Property Restoration transporting the items to the department's distribution address. Ms. Lane, you need to unmute your line. There you go. Still need to unmute it. There you go.
I would so move, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I just want for the public to know that this equipment, the residual value is very low. It's probably in the hundreds of dollars. If anybody has any concern with that, we've got cheaper debt, I believe, here as well. But Mr. Guzak, you had a comment?
Yeah, could we have Chief kind of go through it for us? That'd be helpful.
Sure, Chief.
Sure, that would be no problem. I was recently made aware that the New Presque Isle Fire Department came upon some financial difficulties where they are basically operating with none or very little operating budget, and they need to have new equipment. I'm not exactly sure what transpired, why they have to have the equipment as soon as possible, but they're taking any donations they could possibly take. It came at a perfect opportunity for us because of your generous offering to allow us to buy new SCBA's, which we desperately needed. We have the obsolete systems that we can get rid of. This department needs it. They are at their end of their life cycle, but it's only because of the cylinders. And New Presqu'île may just buy new cylinders to put them in place to have them start operating fine. But they, as far as technology-wise, they're far inferior to what we bought already. So it's an opportunity for us to dispose of equipment that has very, very little value to us. So I'll just leave it at that.
I'll support Ms. Lane's motion. Mr. Massey?
I so move.
There's been a motion and supported.
Oh.
Any further discussion? Ms. Lane?
Mr. Thomas?
He needs to unmute his line.
Yes.
Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Mr. Mansour? Mr. Mansour?
He's having issues with his connection, so go ahead, move on.
Mr. Guzak? Yes. Myself, yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
Mr. Mansour?
he's still disconnected. Okay, next item, the board will consider a motion to authorize the purchase of turnout gear for the fire department from Globe brand clothing through Apollo Equipment, and for the supervisor to sign all purchase and warranty contracts. Chief, you want to walk us, I'm sorry, Mr. Guzak?
Can we make sure we have the dollar amount on that in the actual motion, so we got something to hang our hat on?
Sure.
Yeah.
When Mr. Your Chief Burdett, would you walk us through this and what the equipment is and what it does and why we need it?
Sure. What we're asking for is the replacement of firefighter clothing that they wear, the turnout coat and pants, the boots, the helmets. They have a 10-year lifespan for the NFPA, and we're just replacing 11 sets of clothing that have reached that 10-year mark, and it'll be next year. In the bid, Lion Globe was about the middle of the road, with Lion Apparel being the lowest bidder, but unfortunately I've had some history working with this company that proposed that Phoenix safety, and I don't recommend using them. We had some issues there. Another company that bid very low on this, when you look at the bid spec, is Fire Equipment Associates, who bid Ricochet fire clothing. Unfortunately, their bid was not for 11 sets, it was for 5 sets, and each set was a different specification, so there's no way I could buy those. The other 2 bidders were a little bit higher, depending, and it was because of the type of material that they were using that was not what I requested. They were bidding on top of the line clothing that is extremely expensive, and it's nothing that we really need to purchase. So what I'm asking for is to buy 11 sets of turnout gear, the coat and the pants, through Apollo Fire Equipment from the manufacturer of Globe for $24,717.
And as you state in your note here, it's a 10-year replacement period. So, Mr. Massey?
Oh, excuse me. I just wanted to make a comment. I think this happened about a year and a half ago when we had the commission. Right, Chief?
Followed by pound.
Nope. I'm sorry, Mr. Massey, could you repeat that?
I think this happened when we had the commission about a year and a half ago.
The replacement equipment or the donation?
Yes, the replacement.
Yes. We have like 40 sets of turnout gear that we wear. So each year I'm buying a small amount to keep us within that range of the 10-year mark. And 11 sets is the last that I have.
Yeah, I understand that. I just wanted to make that point.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's been a motion that's been supported. Any further discussion? Ms. Lane?
Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Well,
Is Mr. Mansour available?
well, who made the motion?
Yes, I'm back on here.
Yeah.
I vote yes as
Okay,
well.
hold on just a moment, Ms. Lane. the motion was made, but you didn't include the dollar amount, I don't believe. Did you, or?
I did, we
Okay.
are going to do it, $24,717.
Okay.
Right, and then
Okay.
can you also put 11 sets in there too? No, 11 sets of equipment, not cents. 11.
Oh, okay.
I understood, Mr. Guzak.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Guzak?
Yes.
Myself, yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Chief. Item F, the board will consider a resolution to fill the vacated position of full-time maintenance technician in the Parks and Recreation Department. This is a budgeted position at a cost of $39,780 a year. Upon approval, the position will be posted and advertised. Anybody have any questions? Ms. Lane?
No. So moved, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Thomas, I'll support it if we need to support for discussion. You're going to support it, Mr. Thomas? Okay. Mr. Thomas shaking his head yes, he wants to support the motion.
Okay. Thank you.
In the packet was the job description. It'd be posted. We're very much in need of some help in that area. All right, seeing no further discussion, Ms. Lane?
Mr. Guzak?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Mansour?
Yes.
Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Miss, I have a question.
With regard to this issue?
This is a resolution, right?
Yes, and we voted on it as a resolution.
Is it what?
We handled it as a resolution.
Okay, I thought you said
Yep.
motion.
Okay, item G, the board will set the date for the public hearing for the truth in taxation for September 10th, 2020. This is something we have to do annually by law. I'll make the motion that we set the date for September 10th, 2020. Ms. Lane,
Support.
any discussion? Mr.
Can
Laddie?
you also make that resolution as well?
Yes. Any discussion? This is something that's required by us, and we have to do it every year. Okay, Ms.
You need a
Lane?
second?
Yep, nope, we've got support. Ms. Lane, go ahead and call for the vote. It's a resolution, but doing the meetings online, we vote as a roll call vote anyways.
Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Go ahead,
Mr. Thomas, yes or no?
We can't hear you now. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Are you talking to me? I'm sorry.
Yes, was that?
No.
Are you voting in favor of the resolution?
Yes, yes, yes,
Thank you.
yes.
All right. Mr. Mansour?
Yes.
Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Mr. Guzak?
Yes.
Myself, yes, and Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that wraps up this board meeting. And I just ask that if you have any items you want added to the agenda, get them to me the Thursday before the board meeting if you can, so that we can get them in the original packet. But just one final comment with regard to last week. I think, with regard to the litigation policy, there's an article that said that I was the one lone vote, which is true, voting no on that litigation policy. But I think it actually, we do have a policy, and I think that it was more work by this board to provide cover for the lawsuit brought by our former superintendent. We already had a policy regarding the reporting of litigation, and the procedure was being followed, and the board was notified of any lawsuits. I think the public's going to see in the upcoming trial and discovery that this supposed need for more policy regarding the reporting of lawsuits by the superintendent is a straw man, and that the board's attempting to create an illusion that lawsuits were not being reported. But they were being reported, and I think that's going to come out. But anyways, if you have any future agenda items, I will get the information out that Mr. Guzak requested, and I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Lane?
So moved.
Okay, go ahead and call for the roll call vote.
Second.
What's that?
Second. I'll second it.
Thank you. Mr. Mansour.
Yes.
Mr. Massey.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Guzak.
Yes.
Myself, yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Right.
Good night.
Good night.
That